part of the Christian faith that preaches what some will call, popularly call the prosperity gospel, right? Which is basically, you've seen this, people on TV, whatever. It's like, hey, if you sow $10,000 into my new private jet, you're going to get $100,000, right? So the sowing and reaping thing has sort of been manipulated by people for their own gain, unfortunately. But there is a principle. There is a biblical principle. There's a natural principle of being generous and sowing into the things of God. Of being generous and sowing into anything in life, really. I mean, as simple as I remember 6-7 years ago when we first bought our home, first 5-6 years of our marriage, we were in apartments and condos and townhouses, so no yard space. And so Trisha, who is originally from Trinidad, she loves all this yard space and loves gardening and stuff. And of course, I grew up in the Middle East where it's a desert, and we grew up in high rises, so I cannot handle, some of you know, I'm allergic to dust, to soil and dirt and earthworms and all that stuff, right? And so when we got our home, though, she was like, hey, let's go get some seeds and plants and stuff. I want to plant a vegetable garden. So I go with her to the garden center, whatever, and I'm like, the whole time I'm like, she's putting plants in, I'm putting plants out. I'm like, are you serious? This stuff costs a lot of money, right? So it was like 100, 150, 200 bucks. I was like, wow, with the fertilizer, the soil, the seeds and the plants and all this stuff. And I was like, babe, are you serious? What are you doing? This is like a hobby, but it's costing too much money. Until the end of the first season. Guys, we had so many tomatoes, we didn't know what to do with tomatoes. Like we were giving away tomatoes, lettuce, spinach, eggplant, peppers. It was amazing. What do you think happened the next year? I went to the garden center. I was like, baby, let's pile in this trolley of stuff. Because you know what? I was like, you know me. I calculated the numbers. I did. Organic spinach. How much does that? We never buy organic. We can't afford organic. Now I'm growing organic. This is great. Right? Why? Because what you understand is the more you sow, guess what? The more you reap. That's a natural principle, and that's what Paul's talking about. He's talking about the idea that the same thing applies in the kingdom of God. That when you invest, you will reap. And by the way, it's not all reaping money. That's not the point. It's not just dollars and cents. I was just at a conference in Calgary this week, speaking there for a few days, and one of the speakers got up and he had a great message to the audience there. And at the end of his message, he said this. He says, I want you guys to know, because he was talking about legacy. He said, I want you guys to know that the reason I'm standing here today is because of a few faithful families in a small town in Alberta called Vilna, Alberta, who in the 40s, I think it was, got together and they decided to start a new church in Vilna, a gospel center church. And they put their money together and they built a building. And he says years later, his grandparents immigrated from Eastern Europe, and they were not Christians. And they were trying to get settled in Canada, and his grandmother got sick. She got really sick to the extent that the doctors basically sent her home and said, you're probably not going to make it. And so one day, his grandfather is in town, and someone invites him to the service that's happening at this church, because there was an evangelist from out of town coming in to speak. And so his grandfather goes to this church. And that service, that service, his grandfather makes a commitment to follow Christ. And then he goes up and says, hey, could you pray for my wife who is at home? She's really sick. By the time he gets home, his wife is up and, working around the house doing stuff. And he's like, what are you doing out of bed? And she's like, an hour ago or so, all of a sudden, I felt a lot better. And I'm able to work. I'm able to move around. I'm fine. And his grandmother was healed. And both of them were saved. And he says to the audience in Calgary, he says, I am here because of the investment of those families in Vilna, Alberta in the 40s who put their money and their resources and their talents and their time into building a church where my family generationally could experience transformation. Come on. See, that's what we're talking about. It's not reaping money. It's reaping impact. It's reaping the favor of God, the fruit of ministry. Listen, the same thing is true here at our church. At Village Church, if you're part of our church, you are investing into the impact we're seeing through our church. One of the things that I'm so blessed by and encouraged by, I was talking to Pastor Mark, who was our founding pastor a few weeks ago, and he was just telling me how's it going and all of this. And I said, one of the things I'm so impressed, Mark, is I talk to people all the time in the Lower Mainland that come to our sites that say, I started going at Rosemary Heights. My family started going at Rosemary Heights. Our faith was renewed, or we got saved, or we got baptized, and they're still part of our church. Think about that. 14 years, in case you didn't know, January 24th, those 14 years since we launched Village Church. Is that amazing? 14 years later, there's still people around our church today, in our church today, serving in our church today, that were transformed, whose lives were changed. Because people gave. If you give to our church, if you invest, if you are sowing into the mission of our church, I want you to know there's an impact. There's an impact even today. Yesterday, I was on Instagram and I saw our young adults had an event yesterday, and this young woman was on stage at the young adults event, and she was sharing her testimony, and she was referring to a couple of young adults who had already shared their testimony, and then she was sharing her testimony of how her life had been transformed. Fascinating, mind-blowing story. And I'm like, it's happening even now.